Hey friends, Jeff Fritz here, and I want to go a little bit deeper, show a little bit more interactivity in CodeFactory. I've spent a little bit of time building some commands to help optimize my workflow, but I want to go just a few steps further. I've been doing work with Azure Table Storage recently, and I'd really like to have a template, a command inside of Visual Studio that I can point to an Azure Table Storage repository. Go find the tables that I have out there, generate a repository class for me, and the appropriate entity classes that go along with that. That's a really complex interaction. And I need to learn and figure out where the connection string is to go and get that information from Azure. Well, you can do all of this by adding dialogues into your CodeFactory templates. Let me show you what I mean by going over and first taking a look at my Azure Table Storage so we can see what we're dealing with. And then we'll head over to a CodeFactory template and start using a WPF control in addition to our command logic that we've already been working with. Let's go take a look. So here's my Azure Storage Explorer, and this is one of the records that I've had loaded into my hats table. I like hats a little bit. I have a slight hat collection here. Some might call it a problem. Anyways, so I have these records that look like this with a partition key, a row key, and a couple of custom fields here, including the date that it was acquired and a brief description of the hat. Now, these are being created by a JavaScript client right now, and I don't have anything in C# to create and work with this repository. Now, I know there's a bunch of configuration that I can go through to set up the connections, to go out to Azure and interact with the table and do my standard CRUD operations, my create, read, update, and delete operations, but if I have to create a different repository and a different set of interactions for every single table that I'm going to start building for this application, that's going to be a mess. That's going to be annoying. Maybe I can create a base repository for that, but maybe I can also extend and build out appropriately something that will generate these objects for me and a repository that appropriately maps to my hats table and the other tables that I'm going to create for this application. Let's head over to Visual Studio and take a look at a template that I've built that uses that WPF user control to allow me to connect to Azure, find these objects, and generate appropriately all the classes I need in my project. All right, here I am inside of my CodeFactory command project. I started a new CodeFactory command project right from the template that ships with the SDK. I created a brand new command here. This is a brand new project command, file new project command, and it's sitting inside that logic folder. You can see it over there because I want to be able to right click on the project and generate these entity framework-like interactions with Azure Table Storage. I want that repository for me. So I named my command, I gave it a title, generate repository for Azure Table. I gave it a description, something that looks nice inside the user interface in Visual Studio. The rest of this code is all generated for me. I set the enable command async to true. I'm not going to get too wrapped up in inspecting and making sure that this project is .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET Standard. I'll leave that as an operation for later if I start having to crisscross different project types. For now, this is just for me. It does what I need it to do. Inside my execute command method, I create the dialog that I'm going to interact with. And that dialog is actually, it's a WPF control that's being embedded in Visual Studio. So I execute Visual Studio actions, user interface actions, and now create that Visual Studio user control asynchronously, and it's called repository configuration dialog. You can see it sneaking in there in my Solution Explorer. I pass into that dialog the project that was right-clicked, right? You see that input parameter, VS project. I pass that into my dialog so I know what project to work with. And then I say show the dialog. By awaiting the show dialog, this command is going to wait for the dialog to finish processing. It's going to block the other interactions and wait till it returns. Now, let's go over and take a look at the dialog. And I added my dialog by right-clicking on this dialog box, adding a new item, and inside my CodeFactory templates here, I have a Visual Studio user control. This is that WPF-based user control that I've added, customized slightly, and my WPF skills aren't that great, but I customized it enough so that I can take in a connection string, connect out to Azure, and look at those tables. So I have a simple dialog here that's going to take some information. I'm binding my text box here to my repository configuration object, that's this dialog, Azure connection string. So now when I click OK on this, it'll start processing and going after and handling the information out there in my Azure storage account. Let's go over there. So there's my Azure storage connection string that's being received and my project. Those are the two inputs for this code generation that I'm going to do. I wrote a method here, getTables, that's going to take in that Azure storage connection string, list the tables that exist inside that storage account. And I have this wired to just look at the first table that we have right now. You could write a for loop to go across this, but for now I just have it working with the first table. And I have it getting the first entry as a dynamic table entity out of that table. Give me the first record out of it. Let's take a look at what this is and start generating an object that looks like that. I call this add to tables method that's right down here. And this method is going to create an Azure table record that I created that has this is just a class I defined that contains the name and a definition of all the fields that it finds inside that object, that dynamic table entity that was loaded up. So let's ignore those common fields that we have in every Azure table entity. Partition key, row key, the E tag, and the timestamp. Give me the other customized fields that I need so I have a customized object. And stash them in this fields property, and now put that table object into this tables collection now that I can interact with and start generating code with. Now, I could certainly take this and make it an observable collection and have that for loop run across all of these objects, output some information to the WPF screen. That would be really cool to do, and I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you because I'm going to make this sample code available for you to interact with if you want to customize it, extend it, make this a little bit better, something we can share with our CodeFactory community. So when my OK button is clicked, I'm going to get the tables, generate the classes for the table, and generate a repository for the table. Let me show you what the generate repository for table does. So this generates a class called base repository CS if it doesn't exist yet inside of the models folder. So line 93 is going to look at our project and see if there's a models folder. If there is, get it. If there isn't, create it. Now that we have our models folder, check to see if there's a base repository CS file, and if there isn't, create one, and I've embedded the source code for that in this class just below. I'll let you look at the source code for that later. And I set the namespace appropriately. See this little replace method right here. And I set it to the project default namespace .models. So I go find this little namespace tag inside of a string that's embedded in this file, replace it so I set the namespace appropriately. I then create a brand new file that's going to inherit from this base table repository. And it's a public partial class with the name of my table. So in this case, it'll be hats repository. And it's a base table repository of type, whatever the name of that table is. Hats in this case. So Now I can have a hats class that will be added and I can interact with that will adhere to this base table repository that has all of my CRUD methods created. And I'll leave that to you as an exercise to take a look and get involved with those create, read, update, and delete methods for working with Azure Table Storage. It really is easy to work with, not something that we want to cover as we talk about CodeFactory here. The class that we generate is actually really easy to use and build using the source formatter. Check this out. So I'm going to create a source formatter to fill out what this class looks like. I need to reference the table entity for Azure, so I put my using statement on the first line, generate an appropriate namespace there on line 117, specify my class. Now I make this a partial class. So that later, if I want to add other features to this, I can create another partial class file out there with the same name, hats.whatever.cs, and that hats class will be merged into this file. So I can regenerate my hats class whenever I need it, and that other half, that other partial class, will merge in and add those features later. I do a for each across my fields, and I have a type mappings, so I can convert from the Azure table data mappings to C# table mappings, and it's a standard property get set for each one of the fields inside of it. Close my curly braces, go into the models folder, make sure it exists and get that models folder, and then add the name of the table.cs as a file with the contents of this formatter. That's really neat. That's easy to do. Let's run this and run it against my hats table inside of that repository, that table storage account, and let's see what it generates for us and how we can work with that project. Let me start this up and I'll see you in my test project in just a second. All right, so here I am in the experimental instance of Visual Studio that was launched when I debugged my project. And I can see that CodeFactory is running. Here it is, CodeFactory, and I can see there's a loaded command, and there it is, generate repository for Azure Table. Great. So let's give that a shot. I'll right-click on my project and choose my new generate repository for Azure Table command. And you see my not very good WPF dialog. I could improve this, but it gets the job done. I'll paste in the connection string from my hat collection storage account and click OK. And now I've got a bunch of models over there inside my solution. Let's go check them out. So here's my base repository. And it's got the appropriate namespace. It's base table repository, and it's got everything I need to connect out to Azure. I need to set the connection string, though, in order to make a connection, but I'm in pretty good shape to start with here. I'm in good shape. I can check out now my hats, and you can see this is a table entity. It has my two additional fields, the acquired date and the description date. Now, the partition key and row key are kind of standard. They come with table entities, so I don't need to do anything to add those. But maybe I create a partial class that has the actual things that those represent, and I set those up as properties to point in to this class. That's easy, and it won't interfere with this file being regenerated. I now have my hats repository that is extremely simple. It's just a partial class for the hats repository that implements, that inherits from base table repository. Once again, this is a partial class because maybe I want to create a method in the future on my hats repository that says, well, go get all of the hats that were acquired in 2000. Well, that's a different type of filter that my base repository doesn't know how to do because it's something specific to my hats domain object. So I'll add another class that sits next to this one that has those extension methods sitting in it, and it gets merged in so my hats repository just knows how to work with it in the future. This is really great. Now I can grow my interactions with Azure Table Storage and not have to worry about having to go and maintain code back and forth between Azure and C# because I can use CodeFactory to just regenerate my code when I need it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing this tip and checking out this source code. There's going to be a link to the source code just below here so you can see a little bit more about what I built. I hope you take a look and test and extend it a little bit further. There's going to be opportunity to send some pull requests, and we'll make this template available so that you can try it and use it with your projects when you use CodeFactory.